Hello and welcome to Frost Over the World. Later in the programme, on the eve of Oscar weekend, Anil Kapoor, one of the stars, of course, of Slumdog Millionaire, and a great talker to boot. And then there's the woman who had dinner with Robert Mugabe. And we'll ask how poor countries can afford 21st century healthcare. But first, the credit crunch. This week, the head of the International Monetary Fund said that the global financial crisis is still far from over. He warned that more countries may follow Iceland, Hungary and the Ukraine and may be pushed to the brink of economic collapse. So who's next? What's next? Who will emerge best from this crisis? And who the worst? Joining me now is the former finance minister of Italy until just over a year ago, one of the minds behind the creation of the euro, a real economic heavyweight, Tommaso Padoa-Schioppa. Mr. Padoa-Schioppa, it's so good to have you with us. Tell me, in this current crisis, as you look at it, who do you think, which are the countries that are going to come off best in this crisis? And are there a certain group of countries that are going to come off worst in this crisis?
Well, first, it's a global crisis that will hit every country, just like an epidemic hits the healthy and the weak people. But I think that those who will come out better are the countries which have little debt, little private and little public debt, because essentially this is a crisis of too high indebtedness, particularly in the United States.
So therefore the United States are the most vulnerable, do you think?
Not necessarily, because it's a very resilient economy, and there are economies which may be hit by the crisis and in the end be hit even harder. But certainly the crisis starts in the United States and comes essentially from disequilibria that have developed within the United States. So to get out of it will be hard for the United States, at least as much as for many other countries.
How about your country? Where in the list, from those who will suffer most to suffer least, where does Italy stand?
Well, nobody has a list, and to the extent to which the market may have a list, this crisis has shown that the market is very often wrong. So I cannot place my country in a particular position in the ranking, and the ranking may change one day after the other. The burden of Italy, my country, is the very high public debt. The point of strength is that private debt, which is huge in countries such as the United States and several European countries, in Italy is very low, and this is a point of strength.
What about the situation with the economic stimulus plan of President Obama? Obviously very little, 3 Democratic votes for it, 3 Republican votes for it. What do you think of the thinking behind the Obama plan? Do you think it will succeed as an economic stimulus?
First, I think an economic stimulus is needed. And although, as I said, much of the crisis is due to excessive debt, including public debt, in the short run, it is necessary to be ready to increase public debt even further in order to support economic activity. And this is what the Obama package is doing. It's a huge package. It was approved very quickly, and all these are positive elements. Some people say that it is not sufficient. I think it's too early to say that, and certainly much will depend on implementation. What has been legislated needs now to be implemented, and it can be implemented fast, efficiently, or slowly and inefficiently, and this is, I think, is the game that is starting now.
You're often described as one of the fathers of the euro. George Soros said the other day that the euro may not survive, he said, unless the European Union pushes for a global plan to deal with toxic debt. Is the euro in danger? Should there be a global plan? Could there be a global plan?
I think there should be a global plan. I don't think the possibility of a major crisis of the euro is a real one, although in this crisis we have seen many things that were unexpected. But I think the euro is strong and the cohesion in the euro area is strong. But I agree that this is not sufficient. Europe needs to do more within its own borders to manage the crisis and globally to contribute to a global plan.
And in terms of dealing with those issues, do you think, in fact, we need an Obama-type stimulus plan for Europe?
Ideally, I think there should be a similar plan EU-wide and not divided country by country. If the EU was a complete union, it would have its own budget and it would be through its own EU budget, just as the federal budget in the United States was mobilized. That should be the main vehicle for supporting policies. What we have instead are national actions through national budgets, which are insufficiently coordinated and may have some protectionist connotations which are extremely damaging and undesirable. In this sense, I think the lack of union is a big handicap.
So that the result of all this crisis may be, in fact, that the centre obtains in Europe, the centre obtains more power.
It should have more power. By centre, we mean the collective will of the member countries, but this collective will should be able to materialize even if there is no unanimity. There should be a majority rule that permits to decide even when countries may not have all the same views.
At Davos, both China and Russia seem to put all the blame for what's happened on the Western countries and said it was up to the US to fix it. Do you think that was a fair indictment?
Well, I think when a problem becomes a general problem, to fight about where the origin was doesn't help very much. It has become a general problem and it requires a global approach. I do agree that the origin of the crisis is in a too long period in which growth in the United States was based on consumption and debt. And I think this is an unhealthy path that sooner or later had to produce a sharp adjustment like the one we are seeing.
And in terms, we've got the G20 coming up in April. Do you think that that will produce some sort of global plan? In fact, the word global has been very much a part of our conversation today. Is global union to act in a situation, does it go against the nationalist grain of some countries? Will you ever get the globe rowing together in this situation?
I think this is the events of this first decade in the century and in the millennium, the terrorist attacks in 2001 and now this crisis have one thing in common, namely that they show that problems in the world have become global and requires a much higher degree of global cooperation than in the past. Now, it will take very, very long years and efforts in order to learn to share sovereignty when problems are shared. So how quickly this will come, I cannot predict, but this is clearly the agenda for this century and maybe for some centuries to come.
Mr. Padoa-Schioppa, thank you so much for being with us today. Your perceptions and your thoughts are much appreciated here, and we thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much.
And coming up in a moment, an insider's view on Zimbabwe, from a woman who once had dinner with Robert Mugabe.